I need to tell you something that still makes my hands shake when I think about it. The woman who gave birth to me, who held my hand on my first day of school, who I thought would always be my safe place in this world, became the person who almost destroyed everything I had ever worked for. My mother turned into my enemy, and what I discovered about her was so devastating, so calculated, that there are still nights when I wake up wondering if any of it was real. But it was real. Every single lie, every manipulation, every stolen moment and stolen dollar. And the revenge I took was something I never imagined I was capable of. My name is Rebecca, but everyone calls me Becca. I'm 34 years old, and I live in a modest but comfortable home in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina, with my husband John and our 2 children, Lily, who's 7, and Marcus, who's 4, named after my late father. Until 2 years ago, I believed I had the kind of mother-daughter relationship that other people envied. My mother, Diane, was the woman who always seemed to sacrifice everything for her children. At least, that's what she wanted everyone to believe. That's what I believed for 32 years of my life. Let me take you back to where it all began, because you need to understand the foundation of my relationship with my mother, before you can comprehend how completely she betrayed me. I grew up in a small town in Virginia called Meadowbrook. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where neighbors brought casseroles when someone was sick and showed up at every high school football game. My father, Marcus Thornton, owned a small hardware store that had been in his family for 3 generations. It wasn't a gold mine, but it provided us with a comfortable life. We weren't rich, but we never wanted for anything important. My mother was a homemaker, and she played that role with what I thought was dedication and love. She was always there when I came home from school. She baked cookies for bake sales. She volunteered at church functions. She was the picture of maternal devotion, and I idolized her. I have a younger sister named Chloe, 5 years my junior. From the very beginning, there was a difference in how my mother treated us, but I made excuses for it. Chloe was the baby, I told myself. Chloe was more sensitive and needed more attention. Chloe was prettier and more social, so naturally people gravitated toward her. I was the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who didn't need as much coddling. I wore that identity like a badge of honor instead of recognizing it for what it was. My father saw things differently. He and I had a special bond that I cherished more than anything. He taught me how to fix things, how to balance a checkbook, how to stand up for myself. He told me regularly that I was smart, capable, and destined for great things. When I was 16, he sat me down in his study and said something I've never forgotten. "Becca," he said, looking at me with those kind eyes, "I want you to promise me something. Promise me that you'll always trust your own judgment. Even when other people you love, try to tell you otherwise. You have good instincts. Don't let anyone make you doubt them." I promised. I didn't fully understand why he was saying it at the time, but years later, I realized he was trying to warn me. He saw something in my mother that I was too young and too in love with her to see. My father passed away when I was 22, just after I'd graduated from college. A heart attack, sudden and devastating. One day he was there, laughing at something on television, and the next day he was gone. The grief nearly broke me. But I didn't have time to fall apart completely. My mother fell apart enough for both of us. She stopped eating. She stopped getting out of bed. She needed me constantly, and I stepped up because that's what I'd been trained to do. I was the responsible one, the dependable one, the one who held everything together. What I didn't know then was that my mother's grief was only partly about losing her husband. The other part, the part she hid from everyone, was about what his death meant for her financial situation. You see, my father had been smart. He'd saved money. He'd paid off the house. He had life insurance. And he'd left very specific instructions in his will about how everything should be divided. The house went to my mother for her lifetime, after which it would be sold and the proceeds split between Chloe and me. His life insurance, $250,000, was also split. Half went to my mother, and a quarter went to each of his daughters. I received $62,500 when I was 22 years old, and at my father's written request, it was placed in a trust that I couldn't access until I turned 25. He wanted to make sure I was mature enough to handle it wisely. Chloe received the same arrangement. My mother received $125,000 outright. Plus, she now owned a fully paid-off house worth about $300,000. Plus, she received my father's Social Security benefits and a small pension from his years working for a manufacturing company before he opened the hardware store. She was, by any reasonable standard, financially comfortable. But to hear her tell it, she was destitute. From the moment my father died, my mother began a narrative that I now recognize as pure manipulation. She couldn't possibly afford the utilities on the house alone. She had no idea how she would pay for groceries. The taxes on the house were going to bankrupt her. She needed help, and she needed it constantly. I was young. I was grieving. I was desperate to prove that I was the good daughter, the one she could count on. So I gave her money, regularly. Even though I was working an entry-level marketing job and barely making enough to cover my own rent in the small apartment I shared with a roommate in Richmond. For the next several years, this pattern continued. I would scrape together a few $100s here and there to send to my mother for some emergency or another. The car needed repairs. The roof was leaking. She needed new glasses. There was always something. When I turned 25 and gained access to my inheritance, I was smart enough not to tell my mother. My father's voice was in my head, reminding me to trust my own judgment. So I quietly moved that money into an investment account and pretended it didn't exist. I told myself it was my emergency fund, my safety net, my future. I met John when I was 26. He was an accountant, methodical and careful in all things, and he brought a stability to my life that I desperately needed. We dated for 2 years before getting engaged, and we married when I was 28. My mother disapproved of John from the start, though she would never say so directly. She made subtle comments. He wasn't very outgoing, was he? His family wasn't particularly warm. Did he really have to work such long hours? Wasn't it strange that he was so interested in finances? The implication was always that there was something wrong with him, something I was too naive to see. What she really didn't like was that John saw through her. The first time he met my mother, we drove to Virginia for a weekend visit. She was gracious and welcoming, cooking a big dinner and making a fuss over him. But that night, after we'd gone to bed in my old childhood room, John turned to me with a troubled expression. "Becca, I don't want to overstep," he said carefully. "But does your mom always talk about money like that?" I asked what he meant, and he pointed out something I'd become so accustomed to that I no longer noticed it. Throughout the entire evening, my mother had mentioned money at least a dozen times. How expensive groceries had become. How she wished she could afford to get the porch fixed. How lucky we were that we both had good jobs. How she hoped we were saving properly because you never knew what life would throw at you. "It's like she's keeping a running tally," John said, "of everything she doesn't have and everything she thinks you do." I dismissed it. That was just how she was. She'd been through a lot, losing my father. She worried about things. It didn't mean anything. But John planted a seed that night, and over the next few years, I started to notice things I'd previously ignored. When our daughter Lily was born, my mother came to stay with us for 2 weeks to help. At first, I was grateful. I was exhausted and overwhelmed, and having her there felt like a lifeline. But slowly, I noticed that she wasn't really helping. She criticized everything I did. I was feeding the baby wrong. I was holding her wrong. I wasn't sleeping when the baby slept. I was too anxious, and babies could sense anxiety. By the end of the 2 weeks, my confidence as a new mother was shattered. I felt incompetent and afraid. And somehow, despite the fact that she was supposed to be helping me, I was the one cooking most of the meals and doing the laundry because she was too tired from all the help she was providing. John noticed. He asked me gently if I was okay. I broke down crying and admitted that I felt like a terrible mother and I didn't know what I was doing wrong. He held me and said something I'll never forget. "Becca, you're a wonderful mother. You've been a wonderful mother from the moment Lily was born. But I've watched your mom this week and I need you to really hear me when I say this. She's not here to help you. She's here to control you. And she's doing it by making you feel like you can't function without her." I was angry at him. How dare he criticize my mother, who had dropped everything to come and help us? Who had sacrificed so much for me growing up? Who loved me unconditionally? But even as I defended her, a small voice in my head whispered that maybe he had a point. The next few years were a slow awakening. I wish I could say there was one big moment of clarity, one event that suddenly made me see the truth. But it wasn't like that. It was a gradual accumulation of small moments, small betrayals, small lies that I caught and explained away until I couldn't explain them anymore. When Lily was 3, I found out that my mother had been telling the extended family that John and I refused to help her financially. This came to light when my aunt called me, furious, to ask why I was being so selfish. My mother had apparently told her that she'd asked me for help with a medical bill and I'd refused. I had never refused her anything, and I had no idea what medical bill she was talking about. When I confronted my mother, she broke down in tears and said there must have been a miscommunication. Maybe she'd mentioned needing help with a bill and I'd been distracted and hadn't heard her. It certainly wasn't on purpose. She would never lie about something like that. How could I think so little of her? I apologized. I gave her money for the phantom medical bill, and I told my aunt that it was all a misunderstanding. But I didn't forget. When I was pregnant with Marcus, our second child, my mother offered to throw me a baby shower. I was hesitant because of how stressful her previous help had been, but Chloe convinced me to let her do it. Mom really wanted to, Chloe said. It would make her so happy. So I agreed, and my mother planned an elaborate baby shower at a rented venue with catering and decorations and the works. She sent out invitations to everyone we knew. She told me not to worry about anything, that this was her gift to me. After the shower, which was admittedly beautiful, I sent thank you cards to everyone who had attended. And that's when I discovered the truth. My friend Amy mentioned casually that she thought it was generous of my mother to ask for cash contributions toward the shower expenses. I had no idea what she was talking about, so I pressed for details. It turned out that my mother had reached out to all of my friends and told them that the shower was going to be more than she could afford on her own. She'd asked each of them to contribute money toward the cost, on top of whatever gift they were bringing. She'd presented it as a way to make the shower extra special for me without putting the burden on any one person. Over 20 of my friends had given her money. Some had given as much as $200. I was mortified. And when I did the math, I realized that my mother had collected far more money than the shower could possibly have cost. I'd seen the venue's prices online. I knew roughly what catering cost. Even being generous in my estimates, she'd pocketed at least $2,000. When I confronted her this time, I was shaking with anger and humiliation. How could she do this? She'd made me look like I was scamming my own friends. She'd lied to them and taken their money under false pretenses. Her response was a masterclass in manipulation. First came the tears. How could I accuse her of something so terrible? She was just trying to give me a beautiful shower. The costs had added up more than she'd expected. She would never take advantage of anyone. Then came the guilt. After everything she'd sacrificed for me, this was how I treated her? Accusing her of theft? She was my mother. She loved me. How could I be so cruel? Then came the rewriting of history. She hadn't asked for contributions. She'd simply mentioned that she was putting together the shower, and people had offered to help. Was she supposed to refuse their generosity? That would have been rude. And finally, when none of those tactics worked, came the victim card. Fine. If I thought so little of her, maybe she should just step back from our lives. Obviously, she wasn't wanted. She would just go back to Virginia and be alone and try not to be a burden to anyone. I was so conditioned to respond to her emotional manipulation that I found myself comforting her. I apologized for hurting her feelings. I said I was probably just hormonal from the pregnancy. I let the whole thing go. But I mentioned it to John that night, and I watched his face go from surprise to anger to something that looked almost like relief. "Becca," he said slowly, "I've been wanting to say something for a long time, but I wasn't sure how you'd take it. But I think you need to hear this now. I've been keeping track of all the money you've given your mother over the years. Do you want to know the total?" I didn't. I really didn't. But I said yes. John pulled out his laptop and showed me a spreadsheet. He'd been tracking every payment I'd made to my mother since we'd been together. Every emergency, every loan that was never repaid, every gift that turned out to be an obligation. The total was $87,000. I stared at that number and felt physically sick. $87,000. That was more than my entire inheritance from my father. That was a down payment on a house. That was years of college tuition for our children. And it had all gone to a woman who owned her house outright, who received a pension and Social Security, who had received her own substantial inheritance from my father. "I don't understand," I whispered. "Where does all the money go? She doesn't travel. She doesn't buy expensive things. She doesn't have any hobbies that cost money." John was quiet for a moment, then said, "Have you ever asked Chloe how much she gives your mom?" I hadn't. Chloe and I weren't close. We talked occasionally, but she was still very much under my mother's influence, still living in Virginia, still seeing my mother as a saint who had sacrificed everything for her children. But John's question planted another seed. A few weeks later, I found an opportunity to ask. Chloe called to congratulate me on the upcoming baby, and somehow the conversation turned to finances. I mentioned casually that I'd been sending Mom some money to help with her bills, and I asked if Chloe had been doing the same. There was a long pause. "What do you mean?" Chloe asked. "Mom told me you weren't helping her at all. She said you and John had made it clear that you couldn't afford to contribute, so I've been sending her money every month." My blood ran cold. We compared notes. Carefully, without accusing anyone of anything yet, just sharing information. And what we discovered was staggering. My mother had been telling each of us that the other wasn't helping. She'd been collecting money from both of us while making us believe we were each carrying the entire burden alone. And she'd been using our guilt about the other's supposed selfishness to extract even more. Chloe had given her over $60,000. Between the two of us, over the course of a decade, we had given our mother nearly $150,000. I wanted to confront her immediately. I wanted to scream and rage and demand to know where all that money had gone. But John convinced me to wait. We needed to understand the full picture before we acted. We needed evidence. So I started to investigate. It began with small things. I asked my mother for documentation of the medical bills she claimed to have. She never provided them. I called the company that had supposedly done her roof repair and discovered they had no record of any work at her address. I requested copies of her utility bills and noticed that the amounts she claimed were much higher than what the bills actually showed. Each lie I uncovered led to another. It was like pulling a thread on a sweater and watching the whole thing unravel. But the biggest discovery came about 6 months later, after Marcus was born, and things had settled down enough for me to really dig. I was visiting my mother with the kids, trying to maintain a semblance of normalcy while I gathered information. She'd gone to the grocery store, and I was tidying up the kitchen when I noticed that her junk drawer was overflowing. Without really thinking about it, I started to organize it, and that's when I found the bank statement. It was from an account I'd never seen before, an account in my mother's name at a bank she'd never mentioned, and the balance made my heart stop. $412,000. I stood in her kitchen, holding that statement, and the world tilted on its axis. My mother, who claimed she couldn't afford groceries. My mother, who said the utilities were going to bankrupt her. My mother, who had taken nearly $150,000 from her daughters while telling each of us the other was abandoning her. She had over $400,000 sitting in a secret account. I took photos of everything, every page, every transaction. Then I put the statement back exactly where I'd found it. And when she came home, I smiled and helped her put away the groceries and pretended my entire world hadn't just shattered. That night, back in Charlotte, I showed John what I'd found. "Where did it come from?" I asked, even though I already knew part of the answer. John analyzed the statement carefully. "These deposits here," he pointed, "those match the amounts you and Chloe have been sending. But look at these. Larger deposits, regular intervals. Almost like income from somewhere." We traced the deposits back through dates I could verify. And that's when another piece of the puzzle fell into place. The hardware store. When my father died, the store had been struggling. My mother had told us she'd sold it at a loss, barely breaking even, just to get out from under the burden. We'd never questioned it because we were grieving and we trusted her. But now, with this new information, I started to dig. It took weeks. Freedom of information requests, calls to the county clerk's office, conversations with my father's old business partner who had retired to Florida. And slowly, the truth emerged. My mother hadn't sold the hardware store. She'd transferred it to a holding company, claimed a loss for tax purposes, and then hired a manager to run it. For over a decade, the store had been turning a profit of between $30,000 and $40,000 a year, profit that she'd been hiding from everyone. I called Chloe. "We need to talk," I said, in person, without Mom knowing. Chloe met me halfway, at a diner in Roanoke. I brought every piece of evidence I'd collected, the bank statement photos, the business records, the spreadsheet John had created showing every dollar we'd given her and every lie she'd told to extract it. Chloe cried. I cried. We held each other in that diner booth and mourned the mother we thought we'd had. "What do we do now?" Chloe asked. That was the question, wasn't it? What do you do when you discover that your mother is a fraud? That the woman who raised you has been systematically manipulating and stealing from you for years? That every sacrifice she claimed to make was actually an investment in her own secret wealth? Part of me wanted to walk away, to cut her off completely and never speak to her again. But that wouldn't be justice. That would just be surrender. She had taken from us. Not just money, though that was staggering enough. She'd taken our trust, our peace of mind, our relationships with each other. For years, Chloe and I had been distant because my mother had kept us that way. She'd played us against each other, making each of us think the other was selfish and uncaring. She'd isolated us so that we'd each depend only on her, so that we'd never compare notes and discover the truth. That manipulation felt almost worse than the money. No, walking away wasn't enough. I wanted her to face consequences. Real consequences. I wanted the truth to come out, not just to us, but to everyone. I wanted her to lose the facade she'd so carefully constructed. I wanted her to feel even a fraction of the humiliation and betrayal she'd inflicted on us. I wanted revenge. But I had to be smart about it. My mother was cunning. She'd been deceiving people successfully for decades. If I came at her directly, she'd find a way to spin it. She'd cry. She'd claim persecution. She'd turn herself into the victim and me into the ungrateful daughter attacking a defenseless old woman. So I made a plan. A long-term, careful, methodical plan. And I waited. The first phase was documentation. Over the next several months, I gathered every piece of evidence I could find. I requested copies of my father's will and the probate records. I obtained business filings for the hardware store and the holding company. I tracked down bank statements, tax returns, and property records. I also started recording my conversations with my mother. Virginia is a one-party consent state, meaning I only needed my own permission to record. And so, every phone call, every visit, I had my phone recording. Those recordings were invaluable, because my mother, convinced that she was still fooling me, said things that later proved damning. She complained about money while I had proof she was wealthy. She claimed she'd never received help from Chloe while I had texts showing Chloe had just sent her $1,000. She lied so casually, so easily, that I finally understood this wasn't something that had started recently. This was who she'd always been. The second phase was financial separation. I stopped sending her money. When she asked for help, I made excuses. I said things were tight, that the kids were expensive, that John and I were trying to save for their education. I expected pushback, but what I got was worse. "What do you mean?" Chloe asked. "Mom told me you weren't helping her at all. She said you and John had made it clear that you couldn't afford to contribute, so I've been sending her money every month." My blood ran cold. My mother started calling other family members, my aunts and uncles, my father's siblings who still spoke to her, even some of my friends. She told them that I'd turned my back on her, that John had poisoned me against my own mother, that she was going to lose her house because her ungrateful daughter had abandoned her. It was a smear campaign, and it was effective. I got calls from relatives I barely spoke to, lectures about filial duty and how I would regret this when she was gone. My aunt, the same one who'd called years ago about the supposed refused medical bill, sent me a letter calling me heartless. But this time, I was prepared. I created a document, a comprehensive timeline of my mother's deceptions, complete with evidence. Bank statements, business records, recordings, the spreadsheet of every dollar Chloe and I had given her, a side-by-side comparison of what she'd claimed versus what was actually true. And I sent it to everyone. Not in anger, not with any kind of accusatory letter. Just a simple message. I've been accused of abandoning my mother. Here is the truth. I'm sharing this because I want you to have all the facts before you judge me. The response was swift and overwhelming. My aunt called me in tears, apologizing for the letter she'd sent. My uncle, my father's brother, was so furious that he drove to Virginia and confronted my mother in person. Cousins I hadn't spoken to in years reached out to express their shock and support. And my mother, for the first time in her life, faced real social consequences. She called me, screaming, "How dare I share private family business with everyone? How dare I humiliate her like this? She was my mother. Whatever had happened between us should have stayed between us." I let her rage. I didn't interrupt. I didn't defend myself. I just listened. And when she finally ran out of steam, I said very calmly, "Everything in that document is true. You know it, I know it, and now everyone else knows it too." Then I hung up. But I wasn't done. Not even close. The third phase was legal. You see, while gathering evidence, I discovered something that changed everything. The holding company that owned the hardware store, the one my mother had created to hide the business and its profits, it had a problem. My father's will had specified that the store should be sold and the proceeds divided among his heirs. That meant half to my mother and a quarter each to Chloe and me. But my mother had never sold the store. She'd transferred it to a company she controlled, claimed a loss, and told us the matter was closed. I consulted a probate attorney. I showed him all my documentation, and his response gave me hope for the first time in months. "This isn't just deception," he said. "This is potentially fraud. Your mother may have violated the terms of the will and misappropriated assets from the estate. Your sister and you may have grounds for a civil case." I discussed it with Chloe. We agonized over the decision for weeks. This was our mother. Did we really want to take her to court? Could we handle the stress and the expense and the ugliness of legal proceedings? But then we remembered everything she'd done. Every lie. Every manipulation, every dollar stolen, every year of family relationships damaged by her interference. We hired the attorney. We filed suit. The case took over a year. My mother hired her own lawyer and fought viciously. She claimed the holding company was a legitimate business decision, that my father had known about it before he died, that we were twisting things for our own greed. But she couldn't produce any evidence to support those claims. And we could produce plenty of evidence to refute them. The smoking gun was an email. Remember how I'd been recording our conversations? Well, during one of those recordings, my mother had mentioned that she had some old emails from my father on her computer. She'd been trying to guilt me about not appreciating him enough. We subpoenaed those emails as part of discovery, and buried in them was a message my father had sent to a friend just months before he died. In it, he expressed concerns about my mother's spending habits. He said he'd created the will specifically to protect Chloe and me, because he didn't fully trust my mother to do right by us after he was gone. "I love Diane," my father had written, "but she has a complicated relationship with money and with truth. I've structured things so the girls will be protected no matter what." Reading those words from my father from beyond the grave broke me. He'd seen what was coming, he'd tried to protect us, and my mother had found a way around his protections anyway. The case went to mediation first, as these things often do. My mother's attorney tried to negotiate a settlement. She would pay us a token amount, admit no wrongdoing, and we would all go our separate ways. We refused. We wanted the truth to come out. All of it. On the record. And it did. When the case finally went before a judge, everything was laid bare. The hidden business, the secret account, the money extracted from her daughters under false pretenses, the lies told to family members, the systematic deception that had gone on for over a decade. The judge was not sympathetic to my mother. The ruling was comprehensive. The holding company was ordered to be dissolved and the hardware store sold. The proceeds, after accounting for my mother's improper profits over the years, were to be divided according to my father's original will. Additionally, my mother was ordered to repay a substantial portion of the money she'd taken from Chloe and me under false pretenses. The judge called her behavior a calculated and sustained pattern of financial manipulation and breach of fiduciary duty. It wasn't a criminal case. She didn't go to jail, but the financial consequences were severe. By the time everything was settled, my mother had to sell her house to cover the judgment. The house my father had paid off. The house she'd claimed she couldn't afford to maintain even while sitting on hundreds of thousands of hidden dollars. I thought I would feel triumphant. I thought I would feel vindicated. And part of me did. But mostly, I felt grief. Grief for the mother I thought I had. Grief for the relationship I'd believed was real. Grief for all those years of manipulation and lies. For the childhood memories now tainted by the knowledge of who she really was. Chloe and I grew closer through all of this. We'd been kept apart by our mother's machinations for so long that rediscovering each other as adults felt like a gift. She moved to North Carolina, just a few towns over from me. Our children are growing up together. We call each other every day. We don't speak to our mother. After the judgment, she moved in with a distant cousin who hadn't been following the drama closely. She tried a few times to reach out to us. Letters that started with apologies but quickly devolved into justifications and blame. Emails claiming she'd had no choice, that we didn't understand, that we'd ruined her life over misunderstandings. We didn't respond. There are people who think we were too harsh, who believe that no matter what a parent does, you owe them forgiveness, who say that family is family and that grudges only hurt the person holding them. I understand that perspective. I've wrestled with it in countless sleepless nights. But here's what I've come to believe. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. I can work on forgiving my mother for my own peace of mind, for my own healing. But that doesn't mean I have to let her back into my life. It doesn't mean I have to give her another opportunity to manipulate and deceive me. Some relationships are too broken to be repaired. Some trust, once shattered, can never be rebuilt. And sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is walk away and build a new life without the person who hurt you. That's what I've done. But the story doesn't quite end there. Because there was one more revelation, one more secret that came to light during the legal proceedings. And it changed my understanding of everything. Remember how I mentioned that my mother had old emails from my father on her computer? Well, when we subpoenaed those emails, we got more than we bargained for. My father, in his final months, had been keeping a journal. He saved it as a document on the family computer, which my mother had inherited. She clearly never read it, or if she did, she didn't think it was significant enough to delete. But we found it during discovery. In that journal, my father wrote about his life, his hopes, his fears. He wrote about his love for Chloe and me. He wrote about his struggles with the business, with his health, with his marriage. And he wrote about the affair. My mother had cheated on my father early in their marriage, before I was born. He'd discovered it when I was a toddler and Chloe wasn't even conceived yet. He'd almost left her, but she'd begged him to stay, promised to change, and he'd loved her enough to try. But he'd never fully trusted her again. The will, with its protections and stipulations, was born from that broken trust. He'd stayed with her for us, for his children, but he'd spent the rest of his life waiting for the other shoe to drop. Reading my father's words, feeling his pain and disillusionment across the years, I finally understood something important. My mother's deceptions hadn't started with money. They'd started with betrayal. She'd been lying and manipulating for her entire adult life. My father had known. He'd tried to protect us anyway. He'd died still loving her, still hoping she might change. But he'd known, deep down, that she probably wouldn't. I wish I could have talked to him about it. I wish I could have asked him how he coped, how he stayed, how he managed to be such a wonderful father despite being married to someone who didn't deserve him. But I can't. All I have are his words, preserved accidentally, a final gift from beyond the grave. I shared the journal with Chloe. We cried together. We raged together. And then we made peace with the fact that some questions would never be answered. Our mother was who she was. Maybe something in her childhood had broken her capacity for honesty and genuine connection. Maybe she was simply born that way. It didn't really matter. What mattered was that we had broken free of her influence. We had found the truth, and we had found each other. It's been 2 years now since the court case ended. My life has moved on in ways I never expected. John and I are doing well. Better than well, actually. The money we recovered, combined with what I'd managed to save over the years, allowed us to pay off our mortgage and start college funds for the kids. We took a family vacation last summer, something I never would have been able to afford when I was still pouring money into my mother's endless demands. Lily is 9 now, bright and curious and completely unaware of the drama that consumed her early childhood. Marcus is 6, and he has my father's laugh. Sometimes I look at him and I feel my dad's presence so strongly that I have to step away to collect myself. Chloe met someone, a good man named David who treats her like she deserves to be treated. They're talking about getting married. When they do, I'll be her maid of honor and will dance at her wedding, and our mother won't be there. Ellie, the neighbor who's known our family for decades, still checks in on us. She was the one who first suggested that something wasn't right with my mother, back when I was still blind to it. I didn't listen then, but I've thanked her many times since. I watched your father try to protect you girls for years, Ellie told me recently. He made me promise to keep an eye on you after he was gone. I'm just sorry I couldn't do more. I told her she'd done exactly what she could. She'd planted seeds of doubt that eventually grew into clarity. Sometimes that's all any of us can do for each other. As for my mother, I hear things occasionally. The cousin she was living with got tired of her demands and asked her to leave. She's in an apartment now, smaller and less comfortable than the house she lost. She still tells people that her daughters betrayed her, that we stole her money through legal trickery, that she's the victim of ungrateful children who abandoned her in her time of need. Some people believe her. That's the nature of manipulation. She's spent a lifetime perfecting her performance, and there will always be an audience willing to buy tickets. But more and more people know the truth. The legal record is public. The evidence is undeniable. And every time she tells her version of events, someone eventually hears the real story. I've thought a lot about karma over the past 2 years, about justice and consequences, and whether the universe really does balance its books in the end. I don't know if I believe in cosmic justice, but I believe in the justice we create for ourselves. My mother spent decades building a carefully constructed world of lies, and when that world collapsed, it was because her own daughters found the courage to pull back the curtain. That feels like justice to me, not vengeance, not cruelty, just truth, just consequences, just the natural result of building your life on a foundation of deception. The hardest part still is mourning the mother I thought I had. That woman, the devoted homemaker, the sacrificing parent, the pillar of our family, she never really existed. She was a character my real mother played, a role she inhabited when it served her purposes. But here's what I've learned. You can grieve for something that never existed. You can mourn the loss of an illusion. And that grief is real, even if the thing you're grieving isn't. I allow myself that grief. I don't fight it or feel ashamed of it. Some nights I still cry for the mother I wish I'd had. I still feel the ache of that absence. But I don't let it control me anymore. I don't let it stop me from living my life, from loving my children, from building something beautiful and true with the people who actually deserve my trust. That's the real revenge, I think. Not the legal case, not the exposed lies, not the financial consequences. The real revenge is living well, building a family that's based on honesty and love, breaking the cycle of manipulation that my mother tried so hard to perpetuate. My children will never wonder if I really love them. They'll never be played against each other for my benefit. They'll never doubt whether they can trust me because I will never, ever become what my mother was. That's my promise to them, to my father's memory, to myself. I used to think that family was about blood, about obligation, about staying connected no matter what because you were bound together by something deeper than choice. Now I know better. Family is about trust, about showing up for each other, about telling the truth even when it's hard, about choosing every single day to be worthy of someone's love. My mother was never my family. Not really. She was a woman who happened to give birth to me, who used that biological connection as a weapon for her own gain. When I finally saw her clearly, when I finally understood what she really was, the bond I thought we had evaporated like morning fog. What I have now is better. Chloe and I rebuilding our sisterhood from the ground up. John and the kids, a home full of love and laughter and honesty. Friends who know my story and stand by me anyway. That's my family. My real family. Not the one I was born into, but the one I've created. And if there's a message in all of this, if there's something I want anyone hearing my story to understand, it's this. Blood does not obligate you to accept abuse. Parenthood does not excuse manipulation. And the people who hurt you do not get to decide when you've forgiven them enough. You get to decide. You get to draw your own boundaries. You get to protect yourself and the people you love from those who would use your trust against you. I spent 32 years trying to be the good daughter, trying to earn my mother's love through sacrifice and obedience and blind loyalty. And all I earned was exploitation. Now I'm done being the good daughter. Now I'm just me, with all my scars and all my strength. A mother myself, determined to do better. A sister, finally connected to the sibling I was kept from. A wife, grateful for a partner who helped me see the truth. A survivor. That's what I am now. A survivor of maternal betrayal. And if you're out there listening to this, wondering if your own parent is manipulating you, wondering if you're crazy for questioning someone who's supposed to love you unconditionally, I want you to hear this clearly. Trust yourself. Your instincts are telling you something. And the people who truly love you will never make you doubt your own perception of reality. They'll never take from you while claiming to have nothing. They'll never turn your siblings or friends or extended family against you. They'll never make you feel like you owe them more than you can give. Real love doesn't work that way. It took me 32 years to learn that lesson. I hope it doesn't take you as long. My mother turned into my enemy. But in the end, she taught me something invaluable. She taught me what love is not. And in the space she left, I've learned what it truly is. That's her legacy. Not the money she stole or the lies she told. Just a daughter who finally knows the difference between manipulation and love. And a story that I'm sharing now, with anyone who needs to hear it. You're not crazy. You're not ungrateful. You're not a bad child for seeing through the performance, you're just awake. Welcome to the other side.